Hello, everyone, and thanks for listening to the Quality Hub, Chatting with ISO Experts. I'm your host, Xavier Francis, and today I'm here with Norm Verbeck, consultant from here at Core. Glad you could join us again, Norm.
Glad to be here, Xavier.
Awesome. So this week's podcast is going to be on 9001 and environmental management and how they align. But before we dig into that, let's first learn a little bit about our guest, Norm, who's been on here before. So let's start with a question. If you could have dinner with anyone in the world, alive or dead, who would that be?
Probably my grandfather.
Your grandfather?
Probably.
Any specific reason you're willing to share or no?
Just probably to get a different perception now that I'm a little bit older than I was at the time when he passed away. I was, late teens, early 20s, so I'm quite a bit older now. So just a different perspective.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I didn't really have any grandparents, but when I got married, my grandfather-in-law, I could just sit there and listen to him talk for like hours just to absorb some wisdom. So yeah, I understand that. It would be neat to have a different perspective of like, hey, can you help me out a little bit? You're sort of the age you were at one point. That's cool. That's cool.
Yeah, just you would have, you talk to him about different things now than at that stage in your life when you were younger. So.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, let's get started on the questions today.
Yes, sure.
On 9001 and 14001. What are the key similarities between ISO 9001 and 14001?
So they're both internationally recognized standards. So it's kind of a agreed upon set of baseline standards that good business practices basically across the globe.
Right.
So that's kind of where it starts. They're also very similar just in the fact that 14001 is aligned and very close with many of the requirements of 9001. It just kind of expands based on just an environmental perspective.
Okay.
Starting with, they're both internationally recognized. They are looking to set up your management system practices, whether it's quality or environmental. And they both can be applicable to other standards as well. So there are some overlap eventually with other ones like 45001 for occupational health and safety, but we'll focus mostly on 9 and 14 today. So there are a few things you can kind of set up for kind of maximize your efforts. Management reviews are basically same requirement. You have to conduct management reviews. There's just some focuses of the management review being maybe similar for both, but there's some nuances between the two.
Okay. So, and they both need like a management review and similar things, which I think you'll probably talk about here in a second.
Yep. Management review. They both require, that you do your own internal audits throughout the year. So that's a similarity. Both require, having non-conformance corrective action processes in place. And obviously document control is a big piece, a little bit more of a focus initially on 9001, but that carries over to 14001 as well. So any documents you utilize for your environmental management system, obviously, they need to be properly controlled, periodically reviewed, all the same requirements.
Right. Now, when you're saying about internal audits, you can have a third party do those. It's just not the same as a surveillance audit or a thing like that. Can you do that with 14 as well?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yes.
It just needs to be somebody other than a governing body.
Yes. So the registrar, the third party that comes in to basically audit for certification, it needs to be done internally by your company, or you could outsource to a company like Core Business Solutions to do that. Great.
All right. So how does risk management in ISO 9001 relate to the environmental risks assessed in 14001? Could it help identify if and maybe when you should maybe pursue 14001?
Sure. So risk management for 9001, that starts kind of with a focus on quality, but it's really related more to just the company's overall general business perspective. So usually when you do your first initial risk assessment for 9001, it's really more of a kind of a holistic business view. So some common areas that are identified when you go through that could include potentially environmental management based on the companies. Obviously, that comes a little bit more prominent for manufacturing related companies because they could have stormwater discharge. There could be certain recyclable waste or hazardous waste that they're dealing with. They have to handle in a certain way. There could be changes in legal requirements. That's often a big driver, or regulations, or even your competition. So that's another one. Competition is a very big one. So depending on what type of market you're in, if your competitors would say be ISO 14001 certified, that could potentially give them a leg up in the view of certain customers.
Yeah, environmental is a big issue where people want regardless of whether it's required or not, they'd like to see sustainability efforts and things like that.
That's right. And the other piece is it could eventually even be expanded customer requirements. So it kind of things roll downhill for the most part is if your customers require certain things, then obviously that's going to be a requirement of you, or even of certain if your customer is a supplier to an outside body that they're required, then those requirements are going to flow down to you as well.
Down the supply chain.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything else?
No, those are the big ones. I mean, competition, expanding customer requirements, changes, regulations, legal requirements, and that can kind of be based on state and where you're located at.
Yeah.
Different states have different
probably
regulations.
People listen across the world here, so also where you may be located globally.
Absolutely. I mean, we're based in Pennsylvania, which is going to probably be very different than companies that are based in California.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So what are the benefits of aligning 9001 with an environmental management practice?
So with aligning them up front, and you could even align this, later if you decide you're going to integrate or pursue 14001 and you're already certified to 9001, it's usually best to integrate just because there's going to be reduced documentation as one big piece. So you don't have to keep a separate quality manual, a separate environmental manual. You could integrate the two because a lot of the requirements for the standards are similar in some areas.
And they're laid out the same way for the most part.
The numbering, they're based on a set structure.
Annex SL?
It is
Annex
Annex SL.
That's tough to say.
That is correct.
Annex SL.
Yes. So it's kind of the baseline with how it's kind of formatted and structured. Most of those clause numbers are the same. There's a couple differences between the two. For 14001, like, for example, like 8.2 is more focused on it's either aspects and impacts or it's your emergency preparedness. I think it's emergency preparedness, though.
Yeah, there's some slight variations, but it's not that hard to align them is the whole point.
Yep, which is for 9001, it's requirements, customer requirements, versus 14001, it's your emergency preparedness.
Right. So you're reducing documentation. Anything else?
Time savings is a big one. So that could be with training related to employees, kind of training time. Actually, management review is a big one. So you don't have to necessarily do two separate management review meetings. You could conduct one.
Yeah.
The internal auditing piece, you could be auditing for both standards. When you're auditing a particular process, instead of just auditing for quality at one point in time, then going back later for the environmental piece. The external audits themselves with the registrar.
That could be a big one, getting an integrated audit. That could really help save some money.
Instead of the auditor coming back 2 times a year, they're coming back at one point in time. So it's kind of the time savings, potential cost savings with that as well. Travel costs. So that's a big piece. And then even the risk mitigation, that's, obviously some risk could be pertaining to certain requirements for an environmental standpoint. By implementing a standard system and good management practices, that can also help with risk mitigation.
Yeah. Okay, that's pretty clear. So how can an organization integrate ISO 9001 with 14001 in its management systems?
So usually the first piece is when you're starting to integrate, you want to kind of look at your current practices for whether it's your quality management or items related to environmental management. But you want to determine those kind of from a holistic perspective. You need to integrate the review of the processes into the management review. Okay. So if there's some variations between different processes for the environmental standpoint versus the quality, it's good to integrate the review of those to be done at the same time.
Okay.
So versus doing them separately. And then the other big piece is ensuring that you do have a non-conformance and corrective action process that can accommodate both quality and environmental related issues when they arise.
Okay.
So 14001 is more of like not necessarily an incident. I mean, you could have a spill, chemical spill, or you could have potentially, if there's certain waste streams that need to be handled separately, you could find where some recyclables or waste streams are being intermingled. So like that's technically would be a non-conformance when you identify those. So you should be taking action to address those. And you should document those because you would like to know how often those things are happening.
Right. Now, going back to the process point, and from a layman's term, because I've never really worked in manufacturing. But let's say I'm using clearly manufacturing as an example here. Let's say you have your process for how you're working a machine, and let's say that uses some kind of lubricant that needs to be managed environmentally, instead of looking at it as the process of this is how we just run the machine and this is how we deal with any of the waste that might be coming from it that could potentially have a hazard. You're going to incorporate that process together?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay. Now, would that necessarily mean it would be the same people, or just maybe, let's say you have a waste management team and they just deal with all that. You'd align it so they might work with at the same time, or and with the people that might be maintenance.
Yep.
That might be coming from maintenance. They might be there at the same time.
That's
or something
correct.
like that.
Yeah, the scope would expand a little bit. So, when you bring the environmental piece in, obviously you have some of those, used oils from the machine that you have to, if you are doing preventive maintenance, you have to kind of, if you're emptying and changing the oil out on a machine, then you have to basically dispose of that used oil in a certain manner.
Right.
If you're accumulating that, then you have to dispose of it eventually in a proper way. And there's even requirements. You can only accumulate certain types of materials for a certain period of time.
And how much
you can have on site. So there's a lot of pieces that kind of come into play, and those would become kind of more of a focus for the environmental piece of the internal or external audit, versus that really would not be a focus during, say, 9001.
Right. And the maintenance guy's like, I just changed oil.
Yep. So yeah,
I don't know where it goes. It just sits over there.
That's right.
Exactly. Well,
that's right.
You put that in your process. Maybe he notifies the person, hey, I've got some waste oil that needs to be handled. And then they're like, oh, we're getting too full here. We're reaching our capacity. We need to get that removed and handled. So
absolutely,
that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
And then it can also come into play a little bit with those types of things when you have changes to, say, in a manufacturing setting where maybe the machine is older and you're looking to replace it. So when you replace the machine, then that kind of comes into a little bit of a risk assessment. So does the new machine use different types of oils that need to be maybe handled separately or differently than they have in the past? So you would look at it from an environmental standpoint, even from a health and safety standpoint. Do you need new PPE with that machine?
How are you going to dispose of the old one?
That's correct.
Is there something dangerous in there that you need to make
Potentially
sure?
Potentially
could be. Okay, so can aligning ISO 9001 with environmental management lead to cost savings? And if so, how? Talked a little bit about it, like from an audit standpoint. You can save some money by only having one audit and integrating some things. But are there some other ways?
Yep. So, with aligning them, there should be some kind of reduced maintenance costs. So, as far as maintaining your systems.
Okay.
So, if you align them properly, you could have less people that you're needing to basically manage the systems.
Okay.
So, there could be some alignment there. we talked about the reduced audit days, which there is a financial cost to that, but also just the kind of benefit or time based.
Well, yeah, if you're paying your own employees to be there, they're not doing their regular work. You're saving some money there.
That's exactly right. So, but the audit days, the travel expenses we kind of talked about with the audits. So there could be travel costs, but if you're integrating the two and aligning them to be audited at the same time, then that'd be less cost as well. And the other piece we kind of talked about is more of like an opportunity cost or time commitment, reduced time commitment when you're integrating, because both, if you align it properly, the big piece is like management review. That is somewhat of a time commitment throughout the year to conduct those properly, but they can be structured to review both quality and environmental at the same time instead of reviewing them separately.
Right.
And then the training time also, that's an opportunity cost, but that can be utilized to cover requirements for both environmental and quality. When you have your folks together for training, you can cover both. So just one.
That's pretty clear. Well, this has really been great. Very insightful. Seems like it might be a good idea for some people to align these two. Get your risk together. See if you find that you have a fair amount of environmental ones. Maybe it's time to reach out and get 14,001 in there and integrate those two. Any last thoughts on somebody who may be considering they should align 9,001 and 14,001, or maybe even pursue 14,001?
Yep. So that can vary a little bit by the type of company. So depending on how you're structured, if you have individuals that there's clear separation of duties versus quality versus environmental, you kind of need to consider that as far as the resource needs, because you do want to make sure you're in alignment. So just if you're integrating 14, you need to have your environmental health and safety representative available to meet even with the quality representative if those are two different people, just because you do want to kind of be in alignment as much as possible.
Right.
So, there's going to be a few areas where it might be slightly different, but for the most part, you want to be in alignment together. So,
And also, I'm assuming that, let's say you're somebody who doesn't have a huge environmental impact, but you want to be seen as somebody who follows best practices when it comes to environmental things. You could even be compliant and not necessarily get certified initially. Get those things in line. And if it ever comes down to the point where you need to be certified or you desire to be certified, it's just one little extra step.
That's correct. Yes. That could be kind of the first step in your risk assessment and mitigation plan is, maybe you want to become 14001 compliant first.
Right.
And at that point, once you're compliant, it's really just kind of flipping a switch at any point that you're ready to actually pursue formal certification.
Yep.
So,
and we can help you with any of that, whether
either
you're going to
one.
be certification or compliance or how to align them, what to stick together, what not to. We can help you from that perspective in any manner.
Absolutely.
Well, this has really been great. Really do appreciate it. Always a pleasure to have you, Norm, and get to hear your expertise.
Absolutely. Great to be here.
And we want to thank everyone who's listened to our podcast today. We hope it's been informative for you. Now, if you're looking for more information about Core Business Solutions, as we are now an LRQA company, and how we can help you with ISO certification, cybersecurity, environmental management, alignments, even customized training, please email us at info@thecoresolution.com. You can also visit our website at www.thecoresolution.com. And if you haven't already followed us on your favorite podcast platform or YouTube, be sure to do so, and that way you won't miss the next Quality Hub podcast when it's released next week. Have a great day, everyone.